This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello there and welcome to Global Business Africa. We'll be giving you insight into Africa's business and financial markets. I'm Uche Okoronkwo, coming to you from Kenya's capital, Nairobi. Let's start with a look at the markets. Now, emerging market stocks were down today as investors react to hawkish comments from the US Fed. MSCI's index of emerging shares lost 0.4% on the day as we saw Chinese stocks dragged down by property stocks. South Africa's JSE was weaker, slipping just over 1% following its global peers on the back of a sell-off in tech stocks. Most shares across sectors such as banking, financials, mining and industrial traded in the red today. Most shares, of course, traded in the red today. Now, also coming up on today's show. Protests in Mali as citizens feel the pinch of ongoing sanctions. China's foreign trade exceeds a record $6 trillion in 2021. And small businesses pick up the pieces to begin recovering after coronavirus-related losses. Well, we start off today's show in Mali, where there were protests on a Friday in the capital Bamako and other cities. That's as citizens responded to calls by the military junta for them to express their anger over fresh sanctions. Now, the West African Regional Bloc, ECOWAS, imposed financial and economic sanctions in response to delays to the Sahel state's democratic elections. At a meeting in Ghana's capital, Accra, nearly a week ago, the bloc announced the closure of land and air borders with Mali, as well as the suspension of financial assistance and economic transactions, and the withdrawal of all ECOWAS ambassadors from Mali. However, the military leadership still enjoys considerable support among the people.
As we have said, the Malian people do not deserve these sanctions. In no case should the people of Mali be sanctioned in this manner. These people have done nothing wrong, and I think those responsible for the chaos in Mali are well known. At the beginning, ECOWAS had taken targeted sanctions against the political authorities who do not want to take concrete actions that could bring us to the end of the transition.
ECOWAS is determined to stay the course and not lose face. This sub-regional organization wants to be credible, but is no longer credible. ECOWAS is no longer credible because we have seen that in some countries, presidents have made constitutional revisions to extend their mandate at the head of their country, and it has done nothing. This way of doing things is likely to prove that this institution is no longer credible. It is not an organization at the service of the people, but at the service of certain heads of state.
Meanwhile, the United Nations is urging Mali's ruling junta to announce an election timetable. That's amid anger over its decision to delay those elections. UN Chief Antonio Guterres says this could improve relations between Mali and the international community, as well as the West African bloc, ECOWAS. Now, EU defense ministers have also announced that they will be imposing sanctions that are in line with measures by ECOWAS in a bid to pile more pressure on the Malian military leaders.
ECOWAS' decision establishing that if Malian government presents an acceptable timeline and takes steps in that direction, then there will be gradual lifting of sanctions. And of course, I'm working with ECOWAS and the African Union to create conditions which can allow the government of Mali to adopt a reasonable and acceptable position to accelerate a transition which has already been underway for a long time.
Well, let's head to Somalia now, where the U.S. State Department has warned the country's leaders against further delays to the indirect parliamentary elections, and they also threatened to impose targeted sanctions, including visa restrictions. Now, the ongoing elections have been repeatedly delayed after it failed to conclude on a schedule. Mohamed Kahie has the details from the capital, Mogadishu.
The U.S. has asked Somali leaders to adhere to new election timeline and conclude the parliamentary elections by 25th February. The process was delayed several times before, following disagreements among Somali leaders. Analysts say Washington is impatient with the delay of Somali election process that has created security tensions in the country.
One could read the American statement as a leverage to pressure Somali politicians to expedite elections, and Americans will not tolerate any delays of Somali elections. And a significant number of Somali politicians have Western passports or citizenships, and any visa restrictions will have adverse impact on them.
Analysts also link the tone used by the State Department to changes at the White House.
It's the change of administration in the US, in Washington, in which Joe Biden wants to see elections taking place in Africa. He wants to counter the rise of populism in the Horn and in the channel of the continent. So he wants to assert the American influence in Somalia.
Member of Parliament say Washington must respect international relation norms, while its recommendations to expedite elections are welcomed.
Somalia is an independent state with its own sovereign land, air and water boundaries that need to be respected as per the United Nations Charter and the UN Security Council treaties. Therefore, all governments have the right of non-interference in its domestic affairs.
The ongoing Somalia's parliamentary elections are expected to conclude towards end of February, before the schedule of the crucial presidential elections is released. Mohamed Kahir, CGTN, Mogadishu, Somalia.
Meanwhile, Ghana's economy is inching closer to pre-pandemic levels. That's after taking a hit from the coronavirus pandemic. The International Monetary Fund is forecasting the West African nation's economy will expand by about 6.2% this year. But as Ghana's economy tries to rebound, traders are saying the high cost of goods and services is now taking a toll on many businesses. Here's CGTN's Nabil Ahmed Rufai with more from Accra.
The new year has started on a slow note for Rosina Edujemfi. She sells groceries at this market in Accra and says people are not coming to buy food.
Many people have used their money to celebrate Christmas, and because the groceries are now very expensive, consumers are not coming to the market.
Like Rosina, other traders in this market say business is off to a poor start.
Most of the things I sell here are imported. Since last year, the cedi has been depreciating against the US dollar, so it's now more expensive to import food products.
Despite these concerns, the government says Ghana's economy looks positive this year. The IMF has projected the economy to expand by 6.2%. Still, traders are concerned about the cost of goods and services shooting up this year. Last year, the hikes in fuel prices linked to changes in global markets fed through to inflation in other sectors of Ghana's economy. The cost of transporting food to the market went up, and traders had to pass the extra cost to consumers. Economists said as the global economy recovers from the pandemic, Ghana's economy is also likely to gain.
Once you hear commodity price going up, then you know that economies like Ghana, which is commodity driven, obviously we stand to gain, because we deal in a lot of commodities like gold, like cocoa and all of that. So once the price of these products are going up in the global market, obviously you would expect that we're going to be earning some foreign exchange, and that in itself will increase or boost the growth that we expect to have.
Like many traders in this market, Rosina Edujemfi wants the projected economic growth to translate into the cost of goods and services going down. She believes it will help many businesses recover quickly from the shocks by the pandemic. Nabil Ahmed Rufai, CGTN, Accra, Ghana.
Now, Uganda Airlines is moving to expand its cargo operations as it looks to become more competitive in the airline industry. The company is facing stiff competition from regional rivals, as well as the impact of ongoing COVID-19 restrictions. Here's CGTN's Hilary Ayesiga with the latest.
Taking to the skies with a new strategy, Uganda Airlines believes expanding its cargo carrying capacity could help boost its income.
We want also to build our cargo operations so that we can leverage on these long-haul flights if we can take our agricultural products to London, to China, to Guangzhou, to different corners of the world, so that our people can earn, so that we can get the revenue that we need, and then we can even grow our fleet. I think for right now, that is the immediate action that we are looking at.
The change in strategy follows stiff competition from rival airlines. Kenya Airways and South African Airways have signed a cooperation agreement in a bid to become more competitive.
The problem with Uganda is airlines that it is going to face is that you are competing with two companies which are private owned and which are, again, in terms of fleet, in terms of experience, in terms of also because the private sector has come in, they are going to inject more resources. And in terms of airport capacity, these are very efficient companies in terms of those parameters.
But Uganda Airlines says it's focused on its plan to remain a key player in the business.
What we have to do is to just stick to our strategy. And that means that we embarked on establishing new routes. And that's where our energy will be focused. We'll focus on London, Mumbai, Guangzhou, and so many other, Middle East, our interlines coming up, our partnerships, strategic partnerships.
Uganda Airlines has recently faced travel restrictions to Dubai due to a surge in COVID-19 cases arriving from Entebbe. But the ban has since been lifted, and the airline is now making sure that all passengers take 2 mandatory COVID-19 tests prior to their travel.
The vigilance our team has to make sure that every passenger on board is negative. And when we're on board, we're also masking up, sanitizing, and we make sure that at least we deliver a passenger who's negative.
With the new adjustments, Uganda Airlines hopes to spread its wings to new destinations.
The pandemic has had a devastating impact on airlines across the world, but the resumption of flights to the Middle East provides some good news for Uganda Airlines in what remains a difficult time for the industry. Hilara Yisga, CGTN, Kampala, Uganda.
And now let's take a look at other corporate headlines today. The Africa Centers for Disease and Control and Prevention is in talks with U.S. multinational pharmaceutical Pfizer over the COVID-19 treatment Paxlovid. The Africa CDC says it is discussing the possibility of importing the COVID-19 oral treatment in hopes that the treatment will help stress health systems on the continent. The Africa CDC also says acquiring the drug will be part of an approach in 2022 that includes scaling up vaccines and also expanding testing to help deal with the pandemic. And Facebook owner Meta Platforms says it will assess the feasibility of commissioning an independent human rights assessment into its work in Ethiopia. Now, this comes after its oversight board recommended a review of how Facebook and Instagram have been used to spread content that heightens the risk of violence there. The social media giant said it has invested significant resources in Ethiopia to identify and remove potentially harmful content. Meta has been under scrutiny from lawmakers and regulators over user safety and its handling of abuses on its platforms across the world. Meanwhile, a court in Mozambique has cleared the former head of Standard Bank Group's local unit. The country's central bank, Banco de Moçambique, accused Adi Mohanma Nwokocha of being involved in manipulating the foreign currency market. Now, the court ruling found he had no role in boosting the strength of the local currency and that the appreciation of the medical currency was caused by the central bank's own policy measures. However, in a separate judgment, the court upheld the Banco de Moçambique's findings that Standard Bank Group was operating a payment system outside the country without central bank approval. And Elon Musk's SpaceX has launched 3 South Africa-produced nano satellites into orbit. That's all part of the upcoming Transporter 3 mission. The nano satellites are the first wholly made on the continent to be sent into space. Now, the liftoff took place in the U.S. late on Thursday and was part of a so-called rideshare, where companies or governments book a slot for their craft aboard SpaceX rockets. This move further cements South Africa's position as an African leader in small satellite development and helps the country to capture a valuable share of the fast-growing global satellite value chain. And that is a look at other corporate headlines. Well, let's head into a short break now, still to come on the show. Egypt's growth plans for 2022 and how it plans to finance them. Nigerians decry a recent move by the government to tax non-alcoholic drinks.
So this is it. I'm just about to be shot.
It's a little tense here. Bottles are being thrown. As they do so,
there are about 3 critical bridges here in Malawi. That's one of them. We're going to cross that bridge.
As you can see behind me, police forces
who are replying with gas. Gas just came in.
Tear gas. So it's all begun now.
Divisions leading the charge into West Mosul have brought us here.
Just got to be careful here with some gunshots.
This is where most of the fighting has been concentrated.
This is the front line now after 9 days of fighting.
We're about 2 to 3 kilometers from the front
clear
line.
view of this front line position.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Welcome back. Well, let's go to Egypt now. The country is targeting a 5.7% growth rate in the 2022-23 financial year and 6% in the following financial period. Now, the country's finance minister, Mohamed Mait, announced that this target will surpass the country's pre-pandemic growth level of 5.6% in the fiscal year 2019-2020. Here's CGTN's Yasser Hakim with the latest on that report.
The Egyptian government has revealed the details of the state budget for fiscal year 2022-2023 that begins in June. Authorities plan to reduce the budget deficit and lower debt to GDP ratio from a high 120% to 90% or below. Officials are also optimistic of an economic growth of up to 5.7% despite the uncertainty caused by the pandemic. The outlook is based on the pickup in manufacturing, local consumption and market activity, boosted by recovery in global trade.
There are several important sectors that began to increase production and its contribution in the GDP, and this reflects on economic growth. These include the mining sector, the construction and building sector, the oil and gas sector, and chemicals industries. They all have a positive effect on the GDP. The state is also focusing on rapid growth sectors such as manufacturing, IT, telecom, and agriculture.
Egypt's finance minister says a massive 75% of the state revenue will be obtained from taxes and tariffs. Meanwhile, Egypt's major sources of hard currency revenue are witnessing a strong rebound that would support the state budget. Exports have hit a record $31 billion in 2021. Suez Canal revenue has exceeded $6.1 billion for the first time in its history, as well as expatriate remittances have risen 15% year-on-year. The all-important tourism sector has also been recovering, although still well below pre-pandemic levels. The 2022-23 fiscal budget projects an average 15% increase in expenditure on social welfare programs to support the medium and low-income earners who have felt the brunt of years of austerity measures, followed by the pandemic-induced economic fallout.
The leadership has laid out a strategy to focus on the human resources and improving living conditions. The biggest initiative is A Decent Living that improves all aspects of life for Egyptians in cities and rural areas to combat poverty, improving all elements of the educational system, and initiatives in the health sector like the Eradication of Virus C initiative are also a priority.
The Ministry of Health says medical services have received special attention because of the coronavirus pandemic and have launched the new Universal Healthcare Insurance System to provide free medical services to more than 2/3 of the 102 million population.
From the legal point of view, we are introducing the new health insurance reforming, and we are in a very strong and concrete process of upgrading, updating, new building for hospitals. Now the system includes more than 124,000 beds, and we are increasing. We are utilizing all the services. What we have, health facilities, which is organized and directed by the Ministry of Health and Populations, health facilities which are organized and owned by the university and attached to the Supreme Council of University Hospitals, other entities, and the private sector is also had a role in the health care providing for the Egyptian population.
The state budget has now been presented to Egypt's parliament for approval, upon which it will be implemented from June 2022. Yasser Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
Well, let's head to Nigeria now, where citizens are unhappy with a recent move by the government to tax non-alcoholic beverages. Now, authorities announced an excise levy of 10 naira or $2 on every litre of drink in order to help shore up government revenues. Here's CGTN's Kelechi Emekalam reporting.
An array of various brands of carbonated drinks in this store in Nigeria's capital, Abuja. Coroni Fortune runs this decade-old business, which she has grown from a retail store to a wholesale outlet. She rakes in a profit of an average $1,000 monthly, but that's been threatened by government's new tax on products like hers.
The demand is high, very high, but recently it started dropping because of the increase in price.
And consumers may be seeking other alternatives.
People are suffering, people are going through a health. So government should not be talking about increasing VAT on drinks. You buy 2 Coke now, 500. You are looking at the cost of food.
I think we need to focus on having our own locally made drinks, what that can be made in communities, so that the transportation of those drinks from the brewery or from the warehouses can reduce.
Nigeria's soft drink market is estimated at $1.4 billion, growing from $713.6 million in 2016. That's according to global market research firm Euromonitor International. Economic watchers are worried that the government's levy on non-alcoholic beverages could impede the sector's gains and aggravate inflationary pressures.
This is a policy that ordinarily the government should have figured out. What are the implications? What are the gains on the part of government, on the part of Nigeria as a nation? Can we mitigate the job losses? Can we mitigate the revenue that will accrue to some of these companies? It's going to affect the value chain. It's going to affect that sector critically. It's going to lead to job losses. It's going to lead to unemployment, and it's really, going to affect the overall economy of our nation.
Statistics from the Manufacturers Association of Nigeria shows that Nigeria's food and beverage sector contributes 38% of the total manufacturing sector to the GDP and generates more than 1.5 million jobs. Experts advise the government to weigh all options, including high inflation rate, before implementing the excise levy. Kelechi Emekalam, CGTN Abuja, Nigeria.
And heading to Tunisia now, the country has reimposed night curfews and also banned all gatherings for 2 weeks. Empty streets, closed shops and cafes characterized the capital Tunis on Thursday night as police enforced the curfew. Now, the government says the move is to counter the rapid spread of COVID-19. However, critics say the restrictions are aimed at blocking expected protests against President Kais Saied, which were called for by major political parties. Here's Adnan Shaushi with the details.
Tunisia's Scientific Committee to Combat COVID-19 announced that the decision to restore curfew was necessary. Experts say the health situation is alarming. It is characterized by the rapid spread of the Omicron variant in the country.
We took these measures because they were successful during the first waves of the pandemic. When nighttime curfew is respected and all public and private meetings and events are cancelled, we can break the chain of infections. Omicron spreads rapidly. We cannot control it without applying strict preventive measures.
For over 40 years, Munir has been working as a fabric trader in downtown Tunis. He says business owners have never experienced such a catastrophic situation following the successive lockdowns and curfews in the country.
The last 3 years were extremely hard due to the lockdowns. Now this new night curfew will devastate business activity and cause irreplaceable losses. We are fed up. Who is going to pay the salaries of hundreds of thousands of people who work at night? Will the state pay the bills of restaurants, bars and hotels? This will not happen. The country is paralyzed.
Several political parties slammed the government's decision. Opposition figures accused the authorities of banning public meetings to prevent tens of thousands of protesters from rallying over the next few days. On January 14th, Tunisia marks the 11th anniversary of its popular uprising.
The government's decision to impose a curfew and ban gatherings is purely political. It is using the health crisis as a pretext to confiscate the rights of Tunisians to protest freely. This proves against the deteriorating situation of liberties since President Kais Saied announced the exceptional measures last July.
Tunisia imposed a curfew during the first wave of the pandemic in 2020 and again for much of last year, but lifted it in September 2021 as cases dropped. The COVID-19 task force announced that its decisions are based on scientific data as well as the development of the health situation. More than 25,600 coronavirus-related deaths were recorded in the country since the outbreak of the pandemic in Tunisia in March 2020. Adnan Shawashi, CGTN, Tunis.
You're watching Global Business Africa. Let's take a short break now, but still to come on the show. China's foreign trade exceeds a record $6 trillion in 2021. And sports cars and off-roaders gearing up for carbon neutrality at the Tokyo Car Exhibition.
Change is on the horizon. Through the shifting of time, Africa's emerging tech landscape is creating new channels.
There's a hunger for local African content globally.
Shaped by innovation, carved out by a new generation of digital entrepreneurs, sculpted by a mobile revolution, and trickling down to the most remote corners of the continent. TechSpot is seeking out the new concepts in technology, disrupting Africa's traditional sectors.
You're watching breaking news on CGTN.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself? If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
Well, now let's recap other headlines this hour. Ethiopia is preparing to stage a national dialogue. The process aims to resolve political differences, including over the ongoing civil war in the northern Tigray region. Now, ahead of the national dialogue, the government has released a number of political prisoners. Opposition leaders are already proposing a new national constitution. And in Burkina Faso, 12 people, including a senior army officer, are in custody over a plot to destabilize institutions. According to Armed Forces Minister Aimé Simpore, the 12 are among 15 people arrested since Monday after the plot was uncovered. Those arrested include 2 officers, 7 non-commissioned officers, a senior officer, and 5 civilians. Of these, according to Simpore, 2 civilians and a soldier have been released after giving preliminary testimony, leaving 12 in preventive detention. Now, South Africans have been warned to brace themselves for a 5th COVID-19 wave. The National Department of Health and health experts announced in a virtual press briefing on Friday that even though it's unclear when the new wave is likely to hit, it is definitely coming. Now, South Africa is currently dealing with the 4th wave of the pandemic, driven by the Omicron variant. And the health department in Tunisia has announced that the North African nation has witnessed the emergence of COVID-19 outbreaks in schools. This is as a result of the high spread of the new Omicron variant, coupled with low vaccination rates amongst children. More than 13,000 teachers are still unvaccinated in Tunisia. And that's a recap of other headlines this hour. Now, Africa's internet economy is transforming development on the continent by fostering economic opportunities and also providing innovative solutions to complex challenges in key sectors. The E-Economy in Africa 2020 report talks of the great potential of the continent's internet economy, as well as the promising tech entrepreneurs driving innovation, and of course the growing tech talent across the continent. Here's CGTN's Nick Mudimba giving us the details.
The internet economy is expected to add up to $180 billion to Africa's gross domestic product by 2025, accounting for 5.2% of the continent's GDP, according to a report on e-economy issued by the International Financial Corporation in collaboration with Google. Now, by 2050, e-economy is projected to add up to $712 billion to Africa's GDP, representing 8.5% of its GDP, according to the report. Africa's GDP witnessed a growth of 4% per year between 2010 and 2019, more than twice of that European countries at 1.7% and Latin America also at 1.7% over the same period. Now, according to the report. Now, the report further says that the African internet economy is one of the largest overlooked investment opportunities of the past decade, with potential for profound impact on the continent's development. It also noted that despite the COVID-19 pandemic and its related harsh impacts on the global macroeconomy, including Africa, African e-economy is expected to be resilient as usage of digital connectivity and services have increased significantly during the crisis. The report expected e-commerce, e-logistics, education tech, fintech, entertainment and health tech to be the subsectors that will drive the resilience of Africa's e-economy. It's back to you.
Well, let's move on now to some international news. China's foreign trade hit a record high last year, exceeding $6 trillion despite COVID-19. Now, Li Shuwen, a spokesperson for China's General Administration of Customs, says that it was the first time that China posted steady trade growth with its 5 largest trading partners. That's ASEAN, the EU, the US, Japan, and South Korea. Meanwhile, trade with Belt and Road economies jumped by 23.6% last year.
In 2021, China's imports and exports denominated in US dollars stood at $6.05 trillion. In 2013, China's foreign trade reached $4 trillion for the first time. After 8 years, China's foreign trade exceeded $5 trillion and then $6 trillion within the year of 2021.
Now, China's cross-border trade in the first 3 quarters of last year still increased more than 20% year-on-year, and that's despite the fragile global logistics system. And not only is the trade growing, but some of the smaller firms involved are growing too, as part of the remarkable growth in a new type of international trade. Here's Zhang Xishuan with more.
Many warehouses around the world have now become intelligent ones, where smart robots help with tasks like goods replenishment, racking, storage, and inventory. With a surge in delivery demand triggered by the booming cross-border e-commerce business, unmanned warehouse systems have become crucial. And this Shanghai-based company couldn't be more closely involved. It sells smart logistics solutions like these to overseas warehouses through China's cross-border e-commerce sites, bringing in 4 million yuan last year. The 15-nation Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement, which has just come into effect, promises even more business.
Smart manufacturing and logistics is a future trend in Southeast Asia, Japan, and South Korea. But developed countries don't have fully systematic brands and technologies for smart logistics. And developing countries have to introduce all those technologies. So our business expansion in overseas markets has a high overlap with the RCEP agreement.
Aware of opportunities like this, cross-border e-commerce site madeinchina.com started its preparations as early as last June to help companies like Sear learn about the RCEP agreement and identify targeted buyers within the 15 member nations as quickly as possible.
And some smaller cross-border e-commerce firms have also been doing really well. Consulting firm Deloitte recently conducted a survey among more than 600 cross-border e-commerce firms in the Asia-Pacific region, showing that 85% of them have fewer than 100 employees. But they have now entered into more than 3 overseas markets on average, and they may benefit a good deal from the RCEP agreement, which report says they may actually grow into micro-sized multinational companies.
During the first 3 quarters of last year, China saw almost 8,000 newly registered firms in the cross-border e-commerce sector, a number which has been growing by more than 90% annually for the past 2 years. Experts warn, however, that small and medium-sized Chinese companies getting into the sector will face challenges from Southeast Asian nations where labor costs are lower.
Right now, the profit margin for these SMEs are pretty low. They range from 5% to 25%, so which is quite low. But for a branded SMEs that has its own brand, the profit margin could be up to 25% or more. I think China SMEs and they really need to dig into the analytics side, to be very precise on product.
And that's just what that Shanghai-based firm is doing. It's not just selling its products to overseas markets, but also hiring their employees and allocating resources to them, showcasing its ambition to become a true multinational firm before long.
We've already participated in exhibitions in South Korea to get to know more partners there. We're also hiring sales personnel and working staff in Japan. And we're looking into the market in Singapore, hoping to enter in September, and planning for Australia and New Zealand as well.
Yang says their first batch of new employees in Japan will come to work this month. An important part of the RCEP agreement is the commitment by members to simplify customs procedures and expand preferential tariff policies. It all comes down to benefits for the cross-border logistics and warehousing companies, and for the new cross-border e-commerce firms they support. Zhang Shixuan, ICS for CGTN, Shanghai.
And moving now to the European Union, the bloc's top diplomat has condemned a cyber attack on Ukraine and said the EU's Political and Security Committee and cyber units will meet to decide how to respond and help Kyiv. Now, a massive cyber attack, warning Ukrainians to be afraid and expect the worst, hit government websites late, leaving some websites inaccessible on Friday morning and prompting Kyiv to open an investigation. The cyber attack, which targeted the Foreign Ministry, the Cabinet of Ministers, and the Security and Defense Council, amongst others, comes as Kiev and its allies have sounded the alarm about a possible new Russian military offensive against Ukraine.
We learned this morning about the cyber attack against Ukraine. We have to say this merits us to express great condemnation. This morning, we called for an emergency meeting of EU ambassadors of the political committee to see in what way we can respond and how we can provide technical assistance to Ukraine to increase its resistance capability with regard to these types of attacks. I'll ask the member states, although Ukraine is not a member of the European Union, it does not participate in this project, if we can mobilize resources that we have to respond to these types of attacks. We are going to mobilize all our resources to help Ukraine to tackle this cyber attack. Sadly, we knew it could happen.
And the head of European low-cost carrier Wizz Air has said that Europe's airport slot rules should not be changed to protect legacy airlines. Now, CEO Joseph Varadi says that if a company cannot operate its slots, they should be made available to rivals. Varadi explained that easing those rules was in a way distorting the market because it protected legacy carriers struggling to fill planes from lower-cost rivals that could sell all their seats. Under European Union airport rules, airlines must use at least 80% of their takeoff and landing slots in order to keep them from for the following year.
So my proposition would be not to alleviate slot, but just to leave the slot rules as they used to be prior to the pandemic, and the market will sort it out. We would be able to operate those slots at constrained airports, so why are they protected for the benefit of the legacy carriers who are incapable of operating them because they are inefficient? And in a way, this is a way of distorting the market further by allowing access to certain airlines at the detriment of the others who actually could do more. They are more efficient, they would be bringing in more technology, more sustainable technology, and would create more economic efficiency. I think the whole slot question is a controversial matter. I personally think access to airport is a public interest. It is to serve the interest of people, markets, the broader society, and kind of slot access is almost like privatizing public interest. So I don't think it is right.
Well, let's head to Malaysia now, where the China Construction Communications Company is all set to undertake the $12 billion, 660-kilometer East Coast rail link in the country. Now, the tunnel linking the central part of the Malaysian peninsula to the greater Kuala Lumpur area and onto the big West Coast ports was on hold since 2018 due to political disputes. But as Rian Melzer now reports from central Malaysia, the resumption of work comes as a relief to the town nearest the tunnel.
Malaysia's transport minister inspects a giant tunnel boring machine shipped from Shanghai and reassembled in Malaysia by the lead contractor on the East Coast Rail Link, China's CCCC. They'd already begun preliminary work on these twin tunnels when an unexpected change of government brought everything here to a halt.
In the wake of the 2018 elections, CCCC sealed off these tunnels and mothballed this entire site. And with the new government announcing a radical route change, it was unclear that work here would ever resume again.
The ECRL was now set to bypass this area entirely, a huge blow to nearby Buntung, the largest center between the East Coast and the greater Kuala Lumpur area on the other side of the mountains.
Bentong people are so sad
businessmen are so sad.
But after 2 changes of government and months of wrangling between federal and state administrations, the ECRL will now revert to its original route, with Buntong again as a major stop.
With a total distance of 16.39 kilometers, it's the longest rail tunnel in Southeast Asia, and this is the most challenging section. But engineering-wise, given the knowledge, technical know-how that possessed by CCCC, to them this is not that difficult as compared to the previous job elsewhere, not in Malaysia.
Bentong people will feel very, very happy. It will give Bentong a very strong push and boom. Bigger companies, more innovative companies will come to Bentong, will set up in Bentong, will invest in Bentong. We'll bring back the youngsters, professionals back to Bentong.
The aim is to complete the boring of this tunnel in 3 years, and for the East Coast Rail Link to be operational by the end of 2026. Ryan Meltzer, CGTN, Pahang, Malaysia.
And the Tokyo Auto Saloon car exhibition commenced on Friday as manufacturers unveiled an array of car parts and vehicles that target carbon neutrality. Now, Subaru Technica International unveiled its concept motorsports car ST1 ERA at the exhibit, which will run on a lithium-ion battery. The move comes as auto manufacturers around the world step up their efforts to reduce their carbon dioxide emissions. Meanwhile, Lexus, a luxury vehicle division of Toyota, showed off its hydrogen-powered recreational off-highway vehicle concept, which it says offers near zero emissions.
In the world of motorsports, carbon neutrality is also being strongly called for. Racing cars that use synthetic fuels and fully electric sports cars are now becoming very important in the world of motorsports because cars are shifting towards electrification. In that sense, we are now starting to prepare for it.
Meanwhile, the 2021 World Internet of Things Convention has been held in Beijing, having been postponed for a number of months due to the pandemic. The gathering included online discussions for those who couldn't attend in person. Here's CGTN's Kao Shufeng with more.
The Internet of Things is one of the latest technological innovations to hit our daily lives. It's essentially the linking of various physical objects and systems over the Internet, and is one of the principal ideas behind the building of a smart city. Every year, the World Internet of Things Convention looks at how this technology can be developed in a sustainable way. Foreign officials and ambassadors, representatives from international organizations and businesses, and experts take part.
Together, we can raise the bar to the right standards of using AI and Internet of Things.
I really hope to see increasing cooperation between Iranian Chinese companies and organizations in the IoT sector.
Experts say the Internet of Things can help take the world to a new level of technological sophistication. It's still in its very early stages of development, so there's massive scope for growth. China is one of the lead countries when it comes to IoT infrastructure and application development.
Take the pandemic, for example. Since the outbreak 2 years ago, China has done a good job in IoT infrastructure, building and application developing. So China has successfully used the IoT technology to help trace positive cases.
A new white paper was released by the organizers during the convention. It outlines the current status of IoT development and some possible applications and models for future development and cooperation. The document says global cooperation in this sector is crucial to help build the global interconnection of all things.
Transnational cooperation in IoT is complex because countries differ in culture, economic development basis, and social structure. In order to achieve common development, we need to build a communication platform and try to come up with a standardized technology system. That is the original intention of releasing this white paper.
Along with general discussions on the Internet of Things, the event is also holding several summits focusing on the use of the Internet on more specific sectors, such as healthcare, transportation, and agriculture. The aim is to create more cooperation between businesses and organizations in those sectors. Cao Chufeng, CGTN, Beijing.
Well, let's now shift our focus to commodity markets today. Oil futures climbed, set for a fourth week of gains. They were boosted by supply constraints and a weaker dollar. However, traders are saying an imminent release of crude reserves from China could impact prices going forward. It's all part of a plan coordinated by the U.S. with other major consumers to reduce global prices. Meanwhile, gold was pretty flat today, but the metal was set for its best weekly gain since November. It was boosted by a weaker U.S. dollar and treasury yields, as traders wait for more economic data that will give markets more clarity on the U.S. Fed's tapering policy going forward. Well, let's take a short break now, still to come. We look at how some businesses are picking up their pieces to begin recovery after coronavirus-related losses.
Africa is a continent of diversity, with varied climates and enchanting geography, and a people so distinct, but with a shared enduring spirit. We are at the heart of the continent to bring you the untold stories.
Let's have a look.
We celebrate Africa as it shapes its own destiny.
Aden, Tunis, Cairo,
Juba,
Johannesburg, Ethiopia, Tanzania.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Now, world economies face some of the most perilous times between 2020 and 2021 as a result of the coronavirus pandemic. Lots of businesses were forced to close down and some couldn't make a comeback. Well, let's now take a look at the situation in Nigeria. CGTN's Kelechi Emekelam spoke to Tina Obiezu, whose business suffered a major setback. The business, which launched in June 2019, had to close down barely 10 months after its launch. Since then, the business owner has been able to recover some of the lost money and time.
World economies faced some of the most perilous times between 2020 and 2021. The coronavirus completely altered lives, systems and structures to create a new normal, from a complete lockdown to restrictions that include social distancing, wearing of masks and travel bans. Lots of businesses closed shop. While some couldn't make a comeback, others are recovering from the impact of the coronavirus-induced disruptions. Earlier, we spoke with laundry business owner Tina Obiezu, whose business also suffered a major setback. The business, which launched in June of 2019, had to close down barely 10 months after its launch. She tells us how she was able to pick up and recover lost time and money.
Before the pandemic struck, we had invested in some machineries like washing machines, dryers. We just paid for a place. So it was a huge loss. We spent almost ₦1 million acquiring these machineries and paying for a space. Now, with the pandemic and everything, we had to downsize on staff. We had to close up the place. Monthly, we get almost about 300,000 as inflow. But with the pandemic, we could barely gather 50,000. So with the pandemic and everything, we had to close up for a while and then re-strategize. Opening up again in 2021, September 2021, we brought the business home. So we live where we work. So reducing the cost of paying for an extra space, and then we're still working strictly on pickup and delivery. And we have to include at least some percentage of discount on the prices.
Small and medium-scale enterprises in Nigeria contribute about 50% to the nation's GDP and create up to 80% jobs. A report by the UNDP shows that at least 2/3 of businesses currently operating in the country had to close down during the pandemic, and 1 in 10 businesses still remain closed. Business owners want government to create an enabling environment for them to thrive. Kelechi Amekalam, CGTN Abuja, Nigeria.
Meanwhile, conservationists in Rwanda are struggling to control a growing gorilla population following a successful effort to raise their numbers in the Volcanoes National Park. Now, officials say they're now focused on expanding the park while working to reduce human-wildlife conflict. Here's CGTN's Joy Kiruki with more on that story.
The Virunga Range expands across Rwanda, Uganda and the Democratic Republic of Congo. Along with Uganda's Bwindi Forest, it acts as the world's only habitat for mountain gorillas. The Volcanoes National Park in Rwanda boasts of accommodating hundreds of mountain gorillas. Despite this conservation triumph, the creatures are now fighting for space to grow and thrive.
In the past 50 years, the park lost 54% of the size of the park. And when all efforts were put in place for the mountain gorilla population to recover to the current numbers, the habitat has not changed.
We recorded 7 silverback deaths. So that's, again, a consequence of more groups ranging in the same area, really not expanding and going to the rest of the park, and that leading to more intergroup interactions and then more infanticides.
According to workers in the Rwandan park, the number of gorillas has risen from just 880 in 2010 to over 1,000 by 2015. This is after decades of poaching that has caused a plunge in the population.
We are aiming in the next 5-10 years to expand the park by 37 square kilometers, which corresponds to 23% increase of the effective habitat of the park.
Stronger security measures to prevent human-wildlife conflict have sought to win over locals. Today, 10% of each park ticket is dedicated to community projects, while 5% is allocated to a compensation fund for villages. This has helped turn the gorillas' fortunes around, as they're now seen as key to the community's financial future. Joy Kiruki Juma, CGTN.
Well, before we leave you today, a quick look at Africa's currencies. South Africa's rand is strengthening in early trading as the dollar stayed on the back foot. Meanwhile, Kenya's shilling weakening to a new low as the economy picks up and business activities increase after a slowdown during the festive season. The weak shilling comes amid a drop in inflows, with monthly diaspora remittances recording mixed performances last year. And Nigeria's naira recorded a slight fall against the dollar at the official market after a marginal gain at the spot market on Wednesday. On the black market, dealers say they exchanged the naira at around 565 naira per dollar and sold it at around 568 naira per dollar. Well, that's it for this edition of Global Business Africa. You can send your feedback to the contacts on your screen. You can also follow us on our various digital media platforms. From me, Uche Okoronkwo.